What would you say if I told you that the cinematography isn't the thing that makes this sequence in Dune Part 2 so beautiful?
Good song.
Don't get me wrong, Greg Fraser's cinematography is a sight to behold, a technological marvel, a truly outstanding accomplishment in the current landscape of modern film. Okay, sorry about that. I just get excited about this sort of thing. But seriously, there's a lot we can learn from looking at the various elements that make up Dune Part 2's stunning eclipse sequence. Things that can help us appreciate how much storytelling and immersion is actually going on here. Things that may help us reevaluate what we often mean when we say a film or TV show has beautiful cinematography. Because when it comes to Dune Part 2, and more specifically this opening sequence here, Fraser's undeniably awesome cinematography seems to be the main thing everyone talks about. So today, I wanted to talk about some of the other things that make this sequence such an impactful and immersive example of modern cinema. Let me show you what I mean by zooming in on just this series of 3 shots here. Why this moment, you ask? Why not a more obviously striking moment? Like this. Well, that's because this is precisely the sort of moment that gets overlooked in these sorts of analyses. And there are a lot of technical elements we can discern from just this short moment, some of which are refreshingly basic, that fully capture the thematic essence of this sequence in a subtle, effective, and truly multi-sensory manner. Which, when we get to the core of things, is what cinema is all about. And it all boils down to the single recurrent theme that underpins this entire sequence. Conflict. That's what these 3 shots do so well. They initiate the conflict artistically and subliminally. That's often what marks great and transportive filmmaking. Those small but intentional subliminal accents supporting and sculpting our journey as the audience that aren't very noticeable, but are responsible for a huge amount of the psychological and emotional immersion we experience. To illustrate this a bit more clearly, let's start by looking at the shot compositions. The transition between shot 1 and shot 2 marks the moment in which we are very abruptly shunted from trembling behind this rock with a panicked Paul and Jessica into the dominant perspective of the Harkonnen soldiers. In shot 2, we start in a wide shot, framed fairly neutrally, and then as we progress over the crest of the dune, our perspective transforms quite suddenly within the same shot into a high-angle wide shot, looming over the corpse of Jarmis. In shot 3, we're then thrown into a low-angle wide shot, which I admit isn't anything groundbreaking. In fact, it's a fairly common approach to shot sequencing. But with the aim of establishing conflict visually, in just 20 seconds, we've gone from a mostly obstructed, shaky, low-angled shot signaling fear and concealment, to a completely open, dynamic wide shot, aggressively pushing in and bringing us into a position of power and superiority. And then back again to a low-angled shot, now peering up at the Harkonnen threat from an inferior position whilst also retreating from its presence, really effectively re-emphasizing Paul and Jessica's vulnerability. And it doesn't stop there. Cutting from shot 1 to shot 2 creates a type of subtle visual whiplash that's very effective in communicating the differences in perspective here. The sudden move from a tight POV shot with plenty of foreground elements, a technique known as dirtying the frame that Greg Fraser frequently uses in his compositions, to a POV shot that is completely unoccluded, throws us from a fairly claustrophobic position to one of total spatial and aerial freedom. This again subliminally conveys which point of view here is in the more commanding position. Then in shot 3, there's the visual conflict between the cold, black, artificially clad Harkonnens and the warm, passionate reds and oranges of Arrakis' sands. We can see this intentionality and conflict baked into the costume design even more clearly in shot 3's very deliberate camera work. Notice how the camera gently pulls focus in the direction of the leading lines formed by the sand dune, drawing our eyes downwards in the frame onto Jarmus's body bag, where the tones and textures of the bag sit in harmony with the surrounding sands, strengthening the visual and spiritual connections between the Fremen and the natural beauty of Arrakis' landscape in a really beautiful way. And speaking of the landscape, there's even more visual and arguably cultural conflict established here. Look at how the surface of the sand changes between shots 2 and 3. Maybe this is intentional, maybe it's not, but now that we're into the swing of overanalyzing things, I feel pretty confident in saying that this adds yet another dimension to the visual conflict Denis Villeneuve and Greg Fraser are aiming to communicate here. The Harkonnen view of Arrakis' sands that sees them as nothing more than a shapeless source of spice, juxtaposed against the Fremen's deep appreciation for the many intricate, complex layers there are to be found in the desert of Arrakis. Notice also that the glimmers of spice are not really visible in this shot that embodies the Fremen perspective. Coincidentally, as our focus shifts to Jarmus, this third shot also incorporates the sound of the wind gently blowing across the surface of the sand. On the one hand, increasing the feeling of isolation as the Harkonnens close in, and on the other, once again tying the Fremen people to Arrakis' natural beauty, this time orally as opposed to visually. A contrast that is further emphasised by the abrasive, unnatural sound of the drums that have just cued the Harkonnens' arrival in shot 2, and later by their harsh and mechanised breathing.
Good song.
Conflict in every frame and in every technical component is what these shots establish so effectively, and it carries on throughout the entire sequence, but attempting to break down the entire thing this way could end up being a tad overwhelming for all of us, especially me. My aim here was simply to draw attention to how much we can learn from a series of shots as small as this. Shots that may initially seem insignificant in Dune Part 2's wider audiovisual landscape, yet in reality form a fascinating microcosm of the artistry and technical intent that drive the tension and conflict underpinning this entire sequence. From the symbolistic costumes, to the immersive sound design, to the rhythmic editing, to Hans Zimmer's atmospheric score, to Greg Fraser's highly intentional shot compositions and innovative approach to natural lighting. The Eclipse set piece is a true multi-sensory assault, and a particularly fine example of how smoothly and consistently Villeneuve's Dune films blend their thematic approach with their visual and oral storytelling to create such a powerfully immersive experience. And that's really the main takeaway here. There's not only more to visual storytelling than cinematography, there's more to cinema than just visuals. Words like photography and cinematography foreground the visual, but our experience of cinema has always been broader than that. As typical moviegoers, when we characterize the beauty of films and moments like this as simply beautiful cinematography, what we're often responding to isn't just what we're seeing. It's how image, sound, rhythm, and performance arrive together.
Call it.
It's the incredible synchrony of the visual and the audio. The practical and the digital, the haptic and the dramatic. In essence, we're responding to how well every single creative aspect of a film's production comes together to craft the entire immersive cinematic experience. And that isn't something we experience with just our eyes. That's what Villeneuve's two Dune films achieve. They're what happens when the overall cinematic experience is so immersive, so multisensory, so audio-visually layered, so beautiful.
It's breathtaking.
That it's impossible to pin it down to just one thing. So next time you find yourself using a soundbite along the lines of, "Wow, what beautiful cinematography," maybe stop for a moment and ask yourself what it is about the cinema you've just experienced beyond just the images that makes that experience seem so beautiful. What other audiovisual components are you being affected by that you might not have considered initially? Food for thought. Thank you very much for watching.